So let's get into the training, shall we? That's why you're here, right? All right. So first thing that we're going to do, we're just going to jump right in with some interactivity, a couple of housekeeping before we get started. And so as you can see, I have my camera on. We will be doing a lot of discussing, hopefully some laughter. And so I do encourage you to have your cameras on. We are going to do some breakout rooms. If you have to turn it off for, internet bandwidth not going well, or you have to, go talk to a kid, or you got to go pet a dog, feel free. But while you are here, we would love to see your face, because isn't it so much easier to get that human interaction when you can actually see the human? So that being said, our first activity is we are going to talk about what are some things that can make a virtual training go bad. What are some things that can make the training go bad? And I am actually going to break you off into smaller groups so that you can talk about that. And we're just going to take maybe 3 minutes, not a long time, but there's going to be about 2 or 3 of you per group, 3 minutes. And the question is, what can make a virtual training go bad? So think about a virtual training that you've sat through or that you've heard about that was just painful, and what made it so. Good? Thumbs up? Good, good. Everyone's good. All right, and go. All right, welcome back. I see some smiling faces. Hopefully that meant you came up with some juicy stuff. All right, so what makes virtual trainings bad, or what can make a virtual training go bad? I'd like to hear first from Michael, then I'm going to call on Kristen, and then Laura. Michael, then Kristen, and then Laura.
We talked about several things in our group, but one that I'll mention that kind of resonated with all of us is really this idea of technology challenges. And not just that something with Zoom or WebEx or something goes off the rails, but how they access, perhaps, the differences between accessing through a browser base or the app, different levels of experience within the technology, and all these different things can cause problems. And sometimes they're in our control, sometimes they're not, but they can typically lend to a bad experience.
Thank you. Kristen, what came up in your group?
So Kim, we ended with that. So we agreed on that as well. And we also talked about that when there's no interaction, that it's just the sage on a stage. It's boring and it's not very interesting. And then Sharon raised a very good point that she was in a training that the host, the trainer, was in the wrong Zoom room for 15 minutes. So all of the attendees were waiting around for 15 minutes and the trainers weren't there for 15 minutes. So I guess I would classify that as technical issues too.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sharon, was that an ATD Golden Gate event? Because that definitely happened to me with ATD Golden Gate.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And then it unfortunately was compounded because once the trainer arrived, she insisted on a really long introduction of herself with PowerPoint presentation. Yep. And it wasn't enough that the host introduced her. She had her own PowerPoint to introduce herself. So the whole thing, it was about half an hour lost until we got to the supposed content. It was weird.
Yeah, I was there. And ironically, the title of that training was how to do virtual trainings to engage your audience.
Yes.
Yeah. Apologies. We don't know. It doesn't always land, but that's why we're here, isn't it, Sharon? Thank you for sharing. Laura, what did you guys talk about?
Sounds very similar. We talked about when the presenter is not familiar with the technology of the platform and doesn't really know how to use, whether it's breakout rooms or just anything in the platform, and also just interact, like network connection issues, if you know, the internet is unstable or whatever, network connection issues with different locations. And then the presenter just talking without interactivity, just
Yeah.
talking into the void. So pretty much the same things.
Yes, yes. Anyone else? Anyone else got anything to add? Paul, I see you unmuted. Did you want to? No? Okay. Well, thank you for those of you who shared. So, I mean, it's obvious, right? Why is it important that we design our virtual trainings to be a space that engages people and that wants people to feel refreshed? Well, it's because if we don't, yeah, sure, we got the information out there, but did it really stick? Did anyone really leave feeling like they got out of it what you were hoping they got out of it? And considering that statistically it takes about 10 hours per 1 hour of like virtual training to create, that's a lot of time to spend only to put a training out there that doesn't really sink in. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so first of all, you know, I think we've touched on it with this exercise, but we're really just getting the gist of why it matters. And I think that this exercise illustrates that. You know, sometimes there are even emotional feelings associated with having to sit through a pretty painful training or when there's tech issues. A couple of you talked about tech challenges. And so it's really important as a facilitator that we pick platforms that we can feel comfortable navigating. So we're going to talk about picking the right virtual space. And then, of course, as trainers, it is important to have a flow that makes sense, that makes people feel at ease. So we're going to talk about designing the structure and flow of a virtual training. And then, last but not least, we're going to talk about the audience, because it is possible to engage an audience in both a lecture style versus an interactive style training. It's just a matter of leveraging different tools to do it. So here's a pop quiz question. I want you to put in the chat. What do you think statistically is the #1 factor or component to a virtual training that helps people stay engaged? What do you think is the most important factor in people being engaged to a training? Go ahead and write in the chat. Okay, using a participant's name. Danny said camera on, relevance. Okay. Okay, I want to hear from the rest of the group. What do you think? Most important exercises, keeping them curious, presenter questions. Okay, some good thoughts here. Actually, Danny, you hit it on the head. It's the camera. Studies show that having a camera on can increase engagement by 60%, as a person is less likely to multitask or disengage if they know that other people are looking at them. But be careful. Mandating that cameras be on might actually set people the wrong way and kind of have the opposite effect. But there are ways to encourage people to keep their cameras on. So for example, when I started today's training, I said, hey folks, you know, a couple of housekeeping rules. So you kind of set the precedent to start. And I alluded that we were going to do some interactive activities like breakout rooms, which means you're going to be talking in smaller groups of people. And then I also focused on the benefits of having the camera on, which, to be fair, are probably more emphasized in a COVID world, but that human element. There are a lot of people, even though we've been seeing each other on Zoom or on WebEx for almost 2 years, there's that human element that we crave. And so isn't it so much easier to get the human element of an activity when you can see the human? Now, if you have people, I've been in trainings where people in the chat, they'll be like, my webcam's not working, or I'm not fully set up. It's okay. You know, it's not that deep. You don't have to be all, okay, Laura, I'm waiting. I'm waiting. You're gonna get your camera on? Doesn't have to be awkward, but just keep re-emphasizing, and eventually, you know, people will turn it on. Okay. Any questions? I want to pause. Thoughts, challenges you guys have had with that? No? Okay. All right. So We talked about tech challenges and how frustrating it is when you get a facilitator who is not comfortable with the tech that they're using. You know, half of the training is spent going, what are we doing? Breakout rooms? Oh crap, where's the breakout room button? Oh crap, where's this button? Where's the poll? What are we doing? And it kind of makes you feel a little frazzled as a guest, if you will. So how important is it to pick the right space? So I have here, you know, when I created this slide, I kind of put, there's a variety of virtual training tools people can use. Obviously, the most popular is Zoom. But there are others. There's WebEx, even Microsoft Teams has been increasing its presenter ability since the beginning of the pandemic. GoToMeeting, I've seen that. What's most important, whichever platform you use, is that you take the following factors into consideration. And this is the part where if you're a note taker, I would say, get out your handy dandy notebook. The factors to determine which space is for you, first of all, it always starts with the needs, the training needs. So is this going to be a lecture style where you can't see the other participants' faces, nobody else can turn on their audio visual, you just want them to focus on you? That might require, you know, some platforms are better at that than others. Another factor is the capability of the platform. So I'm using Zoom right now. I know Zoom has breakout rooms. They do have a webinar style platform. You have to pay for it. They also have the capability to pre-register people. And you can also do polling. Now, WebEx might have its own features, but it's important as a facilitator to research those features and see which fits best. Another factor could be what your company, you know, if you work for an organization, what they pay for. There are some organizations that just use WebEx. And if you want to use a training platform, they're going to approve for you to use WebEx, and don't you dare add another platform that they have to pay for. So it's good to ask. You can ask your manager, you can ask your tech support team, whoever fits best. And then, of course, the coup de grace of factors, cost. How much can you afford? Obviously, you know, different platforms will have different features. The one thing I will say, if you are a training facilitator, unless you are planning on always doing a series of 30-minute, you know, 20 to 30-minute short runs, free Zoom is probably not going to cut it. There have been too many instances I've seen where a facilitator has had to cut themselves short because they're coming close to that 45-minute mark, and then doesn't it become awkward because you don't want everyone to get cut off. Especially if you are self-employed, highly encourage you to consider paying for a platform. Any thoughts on that? Danny, I saw you head nodding a lot. What's going on in your mind?
I suppose part of it is just being familiar with what your company supports and has identified, not only just for cost, but also security and confidentiality purposes. That a lot of these platforms do also have other relationships with other companies where data is shared or mined in the background that you may not be familiar with. So depending on the team that you're working with or the information that you're sharing, it is valuable to know what the privacy and confidentiality agreements are with these streaming and WebExing platforms.
Yeah, I was going to say, Danny, at Apple, they use WebEx, don't they?
We do, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for that particular reason. Zoom is not secure enough. So that's actually a really good point for the rest of you to think about is, do you have confidential information that you are very sensitive about which platform you use? The security needs to be on point. Thank you for sharing, Danny.
Sure.
All right. So speaking of design, I know from all of your backgrounds, there's varying levels of experience here. Everything from I'm just starting to get into the training side of this work to I've been instructional design and training for many, many years. So let's talk about designing a virtual training. Okay. So just like designing an in-person training, we have to worry about certain things like the learning objectives. What's our structure going to be? Are we going to do a lecture style or be more interactive? What's our supporting media going to be? And how are we going to encourage participation? So let's start with the learning objectives. I have one key takeaway here. Just because the learning objectives make sense in an in-person environment does not mean they will make sense in a virtual one. Some of you may have already known this. Some of us have had to learn the hard way. And so I'll give an example. One of the programs that I am responsible for at my job is our leadership development training. So when we first went into shelter in place, the immediate ask was, well, let's just take the leadership trainings and convert them into online trainings. Whoa, okay. I can do an online training to teach somebody how to fix a toilet or how to do something a little bit more tangible. How can you make an effective training to teach someone softer skills like emotional intelligence? It's not impossible, but the structure and the way that it's set up is going to have to be slightly different. And so in my case, what we did, instead of just having these one-off trainings like we would if we were in person, they were all day, there was lots of interaction. In a virtual setting, first, we picked the right platform. So we picked the platform that allowed for interactive and experiential learning. But then we focused heavily on post and pre-training work. And I'm talking partnership work. Like, you're not just going to come to this one training and learn about how to be a good manager and then leave and forget. Like, no, you have homework. I want you to get a coach. We had to incorporate, as in other creative ways, how a person could get that hands-on direct learning and coaching. And then the virtual training almost became like a supplement as opposed to being the whole thing. Does that make sense? Okay. So look at your learning objectives, especially if you are in the business of teaching softer skills. Think outside the box, beyond just this synchronous or asynchronous e-learning trainings that can be done. What else? And something to consider is it's okay to ask your audience how they learn, especially if these are colleagues that you work with, or if you're training a company that you consult with regularly, it's okay to ask first. Oh, okay, who are your top leaders? How did they learn? Oh, they had coaches? We should get coaches. All right. So let's talk about lecture versus interactive. So I don't know if this is a myth or not, but it's something I've learned over the past 2 years. An engaging training does not have to be fully interactive, breakout rooms and all of that. I have actually been to 2-hour lectures that have held my attention the entire time. It's harder to do, but if you use the right tools, you can engage people in a lecture setting just as well. I'll show you how. One of the things that I can do, let's say I couldn't see you all and it was just me, right? You're there as a participant. You can't turn on your camera. You can't really speak. How do I get you guys to engage with the training? Well, first is very subtle. Ask prompting questions. So for example, in the chat right now, I want you all to put your favorite color in the chat. Go ahead. Let's see. All right. Kim comes in first with pink. We got purple, teal. I see you, Danny. Sharon comes in with blue, and Laura and Paul. And look at that. Because if you're participating in the chat, it's kind of hard to multitask, isn't it? Again, this isn't rocket science, but it is intentional, right? Another thing, if I didn't want you guys to do it in the chat, I could, using this platform, I can use a poll. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. This is the hot dog debate. What is it, folks? Is a hot dog a sandwich? Inquiring minds want to know. We're going to solve this debate right now. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. Got a lot of no's out there. All right. So since you do have audio visual capability, I'm going to ask in the chat, put no, if you feel comfortable. If you said no, a hot dog is not a sandwich. Who said no? It's not a call out. It's okay. Kim, why isn't a hot dog a sandwich?
It upsets me to hear that. That's the reason. That's my only reason. I don't have any substantive backing it up, but it evokes a reaction that is no.
Okay. All right. Michael, why is a hot dog not a sandwich?
I have no good reason for that to be the case. I think I'm going to follow Kim's lead. It's not two separate pieces of bread with something in between. It's one bun. So maybe I'm just being a purist there.
That's okay. All right. Right in the chat, if you wrote yes, a hot dog is a sandwich. Who said yes? Okay, we have a couple. Kristen, why do you think a hot dog is a sandwich?
Well, it is still a filling in bread. And I see Michael's, it's not two separate pieces of bread. And I raise him a sandwich that is made locally, that is in a split roll, that is not completely split all the way through. And it is a barbecue sandwich. And that is what it's called on the menu.
And I think they're cheating, but that's just me.
Fair enough.
Good, healthy debate. So I did cheat a little bit. That's my disclaimer, because I can actually ask you all to speak up. Whereas in a webinar setting, what I see facilitators doing is they just ask a lot of prompting questions. Hey folks, here's another question for you. They go over a key learning point, and then in the chat, here's another question for you. Pop quiz questions, fun fact questions. These are things that can keep people feeling engaged, even though they technically never turned their camera on. I'm going to show you some other tools. How many of you, raise your hand if you have heard of Poll Everywhere? You guys heard of that tool? Okay, I see some of you have. So maybe this will be pretty straightforward for you. So what I would like you to do, as soon as I can get this, I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I want you to answer the question, what does home mean to you? So this is an activity that I work in the housing industry, in affordable housing, and this is an activity that I do with our new hires. So when you think of the word home, what is one word that comes to mind for you? So I want you to click on the link. And I think you get up to 3 answers. Let me know if that link doesn't work. But I want you to just write, what word comes to mind? I want you to look at my screen here. What's happening? So as you guys are responding, it is auto-creating a word cloud. See that? So this is another way, even if you can't see anybody, they can still give their responses. They can still share their ideas. And by the way, I have a free account with Poll Everywhere. This isn't costing me anything. I think you're limited on like the amount, like the number of individual activities you can do, but I just erase them and create new ones, every training. So good. Now, here's another thing. You use a tool like this and you see these words coming up, and that becomes a participation point. So for example, in the chat, if you wrote safety, go ahead and write safety in the chat. Safety. Okay, got a couple of people. Sharon, what made you write safety in the chat?
it's hard, obviously it's a really intrinsic need to feel safe and comfortable and peaceful where you are, and having a regular home to come to that's yours will let you feel that way.
Right, right. For sure. Well, so, and that I'm just going to put in the chat. That tool is called Poll Everywhere for those of you who do not know about it. I encourage you to look it up. It is free. Another tool that sometimes I like to use is called Miro. Raise your hand if you've heard of Miro. Yeah? Okay. Some of you have, some of you have not. I am going to put in the chat for those of you who are interested in learning more. There is a YouTube. I'm not going to play it here just because it sounded like a lot of people knew what it was, but I'm putting it in the chat so that for those of you who are interested, you can copy and paste it later, get a refresher. But Miro, it is a collaborative tool. It can be used in meetings or in trainings, but is essentially an open working space in which, so do you remember back in our pre-COVID days, you ever been in one of those meetings where you had to do brainstorming and you had these flip charts and the wall of Post-its? You remember that? So for those of you who have been craving that, who have been wanting that so badly, you're so frustrated, you can't have an open brainstorming discussion because you can't do it in a virtual setting, try out Miro. It does cost money, and so in all transparency, I'm not a sponsor. I don't get sponsored by Miro, but we tried it for a month to help with a brainstorming session that we did, and we really enjoyed it. The video gives an outline of how it works. Okay, so kind of segued into the next part of the training. Yes, Michael, it is a bit of a learning curve required. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I reached out to the Miro customer support to meet with someone to do a demo for me. And that's how I learned how to do it. And so I encourage that as well. But we kind of segued talking about supporting media. And I just wanted to pause because we do have a lot of experience in the room. In the chat, are there any other tools that you guys have either learned, found, or even created? I mean, if you're developing tools, by all means, market yourself, to help people engage in this virtual setting. Go ahead and put it in the chat for the others to learn about as well. And while you are doing that, we are going to talk about the thing that we've kind of been talking about this whole time: participation. Okay, so I said in my promo video that some of you may have seen on LinkedIn, I said, how many of you as a facilitator dread that moment when you're asking for the 1,000th time, any questions, any questions, any questions, any questions, only to hear silence back? That can be pretty nails on a chalkboard. And in order to illustrate how painful that can feel, anybody remember this guy? Some of you may know him. So I'm going to play a very short clip. Let me make sure first that I'm sharing my sound. Yes, I am. Just to refresh how painful it can be as a trainer when you are struggling to get people to participate. All right.
Fry. In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Okay. For some of you, you could probably quote that scene by heart. I know I can. For others of you, maybe it was your first time. But as you can see, Ben Stein, who is the actor playing this teacher's role, is obviously in a situation where it's a one-sided conversation. Granted, he is a very smart person. He has a lot of great information to impart to his students. And is teaching adults the same as teaching a group of high schoolers in the 80s? No. But if you have ever been the trainer that has found yourself talking for long periods of time, and then you get to the, any questions? Crickets. Any questions? Crickets. Okay. Okay. I guess we'll just move on. Have you ever seen that? Has that ever, Danny? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah. Well, I would say yes. And over the past year and a half, our team has been really good about using open-ended questions and rephrasing how we ask for questions, so that way they have to answer as well. I've been very, very comfortable with pregnant pauses, and I think that's amplified when it comes to Zoom and virtual trainings. But I find that my tolerance for pauses outweighs what most of my participants are comfortable with, and so that allows for answers. Because even 3 seconds can feel like an eternity, and I am okay with well more than that. So that's been a technique to be used.
Yeah, well, and actually that segues into the first tip that I learned for how to encourage participation in a virtual setting. Now, the assumption here is that the method you'll have to take will vary depending on if you can see your participants or not. But to Danny's point, there is the 6-second technique, which is essentially you ask a question, wait 6 seconds before moving on to the next point. And what happens, as Danny illustrated, is that the participants sometimes get a little antsy, but you hold for 6 seconds. So I'm going to try it. Okay, so we're going to hold for 6 seconds, and I'm going to count in my head. Don't worry. Okay, that was 6 seconds. I mean, it's not too painful, right? But it's enough time. It does a couple of things. One, if some people need time to process your question, it gives them time to think. So I know sometimes as a facilitator, especially depending on the topic and level of experience, you can get a little nervous. And when we get nervous, we have a tendency to kind of speed through. So it's like, oh, any questions? No, nobody said anything? Okay, we're moving on. It's like, I haven't even processed what you said yet. Also, Danny, I like your comment about don't ask the closed version, do you have any questions? But the more open-ended, what questions do you have? Another way is to practice how you frame those questions, right? So maybe instead of what questions do you have, after you make a certain point, you say, what thoughts do you have about what I just said? Focusing, not what overall general questions do you have so far? And you can totally call me out because I totally did that. What general questions do you have about everything I just covered? what questions do you have about using supporting tools to encourage participation? Then wait. Give people time to process. We're all different. Some of us are introverts, extroverts. Some of us need that time, okay? Now, other techniques, pre-assigning participants. So I did this earlier today. Did anybody see that? Pre-assigning participants. What do you think that means?
You're making the group before the event.
Say that one more time.
You're making the group before the event.
Close, very close. Yes, that's an element to it. I saw Kim, you unmuted.
Yeah, I noticed after the breakout group, you said, okay, X, Y, and Z you're going to share, and then you repeated it, X, Y, Z you're going to share, so it prompted people to be ready.
Yes. So this does another thing, goes back to the processing. It prepares people for, she's going to call on me, so let me start thinking about what I'm going to say. And this is what it avoids. If you guys came back in the breakout rooms and I said, okay, you guys had a good time. How was that? All right, Jessica, tell me what you talked about. I only gave you about a second to think about that. And so how likely are you to go, then you feel flustered. I don't want you to feel flustered. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to feel engaged, right? So by saying that, I'm going to call on you first, and then you, and then you. And then I repeat it so you know what the order is, okay? And then if you saw me looking this way, I'm writing it down so that I don't forget. Because what annoys me is when a presenter says they're going to do something and then they deviate. Like, I'm like, don't do that. You said you were going to call on Michael, Kristen, and Laura. Why all of a sudden is John talking for 2 hours? Like, sorry, John. Of course, if John has something to say, I will let John speak John's piece. But then I'll say, all right, and as planned, we're going to go in the order that I said. Okay? Any questions about that? Raise your hand if you kind of already did it, or you've seen people do it. Raise your hand if you will start doing it. How about that? Okay, there we go. All right, next tip. Leveraging the chat Q&A, we already talked about that. So that exercise where I ask a prompting question, people write their answers in the chat, and then I call on people who have written their answers in the chat. I know it's cheating, but it works. As you can see, it works, right? Because I asked the question, people gave their responses, so I know they have a response already, and then I'm just probing them for more information. Hey, Kim, so you said that a hot dog is not a sandwich. Tell me more. Maybe that was the wrong example, but you know, if I had asked, you know, what makes virtual trainings bad, and you had, instead of doing the breakout rooms, I could have said, write it in the chat. And then once you write it in the chat, oh, Paul, I see that you said that, you know, tech challenges. What does that mean? Tell me more. So then Paul was talking. And as Paul is talking, other people are processing what they're going to say, and so on and so forth. All right. I like the comments in the chats. What is your reaction to? Kristen, hopefully you didn't feel called out, but the preparation prevents people from feeling gotcha'd. I like that. All right. Any other ideas? I saw that there were some that were shared in the chat. But I'm wondering, I want to hear from the group. What else have you seen or done that has been effective for you to engage people in a virtual environment? Okay, Danny, acknowledgement of people chatting throughout. You know, it is the little things, isn't it? And I think this is the element of virtual trainings that I really want to drive home. a lot of this stuff seems basic, right? Like if you're sitting here, you're like, leverage the chat, duh. Okay, calling people's names, okay. But notice how the flow and the overall movement of the training feels so much smoother when you do that, instead of the choppy, Sharon, Kim, I don't know, any questions? Okay, we'll move on. You know, it's those little things that can turn a training from being this painful pulling teeth experience to fun and engaging. And let's see what else is coming in the chat. Early and safe and tech practice. That's actually a really good point. This training started at 5. I signed on at 4:29. I know it may sound like overkill, but every live training and in person. I mean, if it's an in-person training, bet I'm there an hour before, because usually I'm setting up cookies and cakes and stuff like that. But getting all the media prepared and ready to go, helps to ensure that it works. You didn't watch any YouTube ads, did you? Which, no, I don't pay for YouTube Premium, but I pulled up the video before this training so that the ads could play, so that by the time I present it to you, we're good to go and you don't have to hear the Allstate commercial. It's the little things. What are your thoughts on that? John? Oh, go ahead, Sharon.
I've also used the renaming yourself function. So, right, all of us have our names here. So, like I did an icebreaker on, you had to decide whether you were more like a Slinky or Mr. Potato Head. And depending on your choice, that was now your new name. And then they had to describe why they chose that toy.
Nice. Very nice. Other ideas, other thoughts? Okay.
Depending on your audience, I think it also can help to just spend a couple minutes at the beginning pointing out the features of the platform you're on. Where is the chat? How do you use it? Because some audiences are not familiar with that at all.
Mm-hmm.
So just spending a couple minutes getting everybody comfortable with the controls.
Yeah. Yeah, Michael, I see you sometimes use annotation in Zoom. How does that work for you? I mean, how have you guys felt about that tool?
How have we felt? Yeah, that's a deeper question, but I'll answer the first one. So we use it specifically to get people to answer questions. So there'll be some sort of a visual on screen, and there's typically a question like rate the priority or something like that. We'll just have people put a stamp on wherever they happen to focus or what they believe to be the right answer. And then it just spurs on a conversation around what we're going to get into.
Okay, I like the creativity. I believe, Paul, Jessica, we've used annotation like in meetings, right? I'm not too familiar, but.
No, I mean, like Michael was saying, the annotation function in Zoom, you have it set up here that we can use annotate. And so I can copy your slides that I want to copy or stamp and do those things. And early on, for when I get new groups of folks who are maybe doing something with us for the first time, the first 5 slides are them answering a safe question about themselves or something that's going on using each of those tools. They sometimes use stamp, they sometimes use text, they sometimes use chat. And one of the questions I've learned to ask is, are you using an Apple device or any other device that you're unfamiliar with? Because some of the functionalities, we have people to do this, their organization hands them an iPad that they've never used before, and now suddenly they're just kind of lost on doing that. And those are ways of just trying to find out, so where are you at? What's going on with you? And maybe some of the things we need to build in some time to help them along. And I have had sessions where a person could only participate in chat, and we did all the stamping and the annotation and that for them. They said, okay, for you, we'll just ask you, put it in chat, and we'll move it over to the slide, and being prepared for that. So I think those are some of the things that we've learned.
Great. So the good news, and I also saw in the chat, thank you for all of you who were sharing all the supporting media and tools that you use, because let's be real, I don't know all of them, but I know you all, and you're all here. So I want to leverage the collective knowledge in the room. The other and the last comment I will say about it's the little things is practicing. I have been a trainer. If you read my bio, I have been in the talent development space for about 5 years, which relative to my counterparts, I guess I'm still relatively new. I've been working alongside people who have been in the training profession for 2 decades, 3 decades. And so, but the one thing that works for me, I will speak for myself, is I practice before every single session. And so when people come to me and they say, oh my God, you're just so natural. I practiced, I'm not a robot, but I practice the flow. I practice everything. My husband thinks I'm nuts because he'll walk in and I'll be talking to myself, staring at a computer screen, but I practice moving the tech. I practice switching between the internet browser and the slides. I practice sharing and unsharing. I practice so that by the time you all get in the room, I kind of look like I know what I'm doing. It also helps me to stay calm if there are technical glitches. I'm not absolutely freaking out, okay? So if you take nothing else away, it is whatever tools, whatever media, whatever slides you put in place for your cool, awesome, engaging presentation. If you don't practice and you wait until right before the training and you say, I'm gonna wing it. Nope, sorry, people will see right through that, okay? All right, so let's recap what we've been talking about. Yes, Kristen, always good to practice your plan B. So we've talked about these 4 key elements to designing the virtual training into the engaging, fun, and sticky training you want it to be. In the chat, which of the 4, so either objectives, lecture versus interactive, I'll just call that structure. So the learning objectives, the structure of the training, finding supporting media, or encouraging participation. Which of those 4 things are you really interested in learning more about? Go ahead and write in the chat. Okay, supporting media. Yes. Structure. Yeah, structure and supporting media. Yeah. That being said, all you supporting media folks, I hope you took notes, but I'm going to try and get these suggestions from the group about other supporting media that you can use. But definitely look in the chat and the participation. And Jessica, thank you for clarifying for me. This training is being recorded right now and will be shared so that you all can look back on it at a later time. Okay. So let's talk about the main takeaways. What was the point of all of this? Well, we all know that when a virtual training is done well, everyone wins. And when a facilitator does not take the time to design their training to really engage people, it can feel really painful for all involved. A great in-person training may not always be a great virtual training. Please do not plug and play your in-person trainings into virtual. If you have, because let's face it, we've been doing this for almost 2 years now. So if you have a training that you literally took it out of a classroom and you just plopped it in some PowerPoint slides and slapped it on Zoom, I encourage you to revisit it. Go back to that training. Start back at the drawing board with those learning objectives. Is it realistic to expect your participants to gain the same knowledge, skills, or insights in the classroom as they would virtually? If not, Don't be afraid to go in and start redlining and redesigning your training. And it's okay to ask. You know, if you've done trainings in the past, maybe you have some survey feedback. But be open to redesigning. There are other interactive online tools besides Zoom. I know I'm using Zoom now, but even with my somewhat limited knowledge of tools, we talked about Poll Everywhere. We talked about Miro. I pulled in a YouTube video. We've talked about other tools you all have suggested in the chat that we can use to help people interact. And at the end of the day, try to have fun. I know not every training we do is going to be the funnest in the world. Danny, I can imagine if you're a technical trainer, maybe you get really excited at technical hardware, software, great. But I know for others, you know, it's okay to loosen it up a little bit because we're human. We've been craving human interaction for a very long time. And so try to have fun, because if the facilitator is having fun, then the audience is having fun. It's that simple. Simple, but effective and consistently effective. So, what will you do differently based on today's training? I want to break you out into one more breakout group. I'm going to switch you guys up just a little bit. So, what will you do differently based on today's training? And I want to give you about 3 minutes as well. You guys are paired up, so it's more than enough time. And welcome back. Okay. All right. Well, we are coming in on 6:13, and I promised you that my presentation would be finished by 6:15. So we're not going to do everybody, but I do want to hear from a couple of you. What will you do differently based on today's training? So first, I would like to hear from John. Then I'd like to hear from Kristen. And then I would like to hear from Danny. John, Kristen, and Danny.
Yeah, for me, I really like the idea of having use of some of the interactive tools during your icebreaker so that the students are already ready to go with those during the presentation. And I like we talked in the breakout how we like the 6-second rule. And I wasn't here for the whole thing, sorry, I was double booked, but I will watch the videotape.
That is perfectly fine. We're happy to have you. Thank you. Kristen, what about you?
Now I do feel called out because this is the second time you called on me. I'm just saying.
You know, you are more than welcome to pass.
No, it's fine. I'm just giving you a hard time. Well, as I was telling Jessica and Sharon, the trainings I design are primarily web-based trainings or instructor-led trainings. They're not virtual for the client. But I've taken away a lot of things from our entire time here. And I swear I'm not being a sycophant, but I'm taking away just the natural way you've introduced all of these activities and all of these engagement activities throughout. And so I've taken notes on that, and I want to model that and see how I can convert that into more web-based trainings. You know, what kind of interactivity can I introduce in my web-based trainings that model what we've done here today? Because it's been enjoyable. It has not been cringeworthy. So kudos.
Well, I'm glad. And thank you, Kristen. I like Michael's comments because you have so much to share. That's why I've been calling on you. And Danny, what about you?
Yeah, so Michael and I had a chance to speak a little bit about the need for further exploration of supporting media and the variety that that can take. I spoke a little bit about the fact that when it comes to long format training, that you just need some time away from the screen because we've gotten so used to being on camera and camera ready sometimes all day long. And so what can you introduce that it provides those opportunities to step away from Zoom in terms of the Zoom fatigue? But for me, it was also a takeaway of thinking differently about the objectives and the fact that it's not just the material that you need to focus on, but that the format of being digital or in person might change, in fact, the learning objectives that you need to achieve. So I thought that was intriguing and something I need to spend more time with and bring up to our team and think about how that might impact the objectives that we've modularized during kind of a flexible time period.
Great, great. Well, that concludes my presentation. So thank you all. Well, that concludes the formal part of the presentation. I do have some follow-up slides for the chapter itself, just to let you know a little bit more about what we are about. And then we're going to jump into networking. And so for the networking piece, if you would like to stay, I do have something special planned. If you're like, I got a jet, I got to do other things. It was great having you here, and we will have this recording available after today's session. So let's talk about ATD. First of all, just a show of hands, how many of you are members of the chapter already? Okay, we got a couple. Okay. How many of you hadn't heard of this chapter before this session? Okay, okay. So here's a little bit of a refresher for everyone. So we are the Association for Talent Development Golden Gate chapter based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. As if you were interested in being a member of the chapter, there are a couple of benefits. So the network. There are a lot of learning and development professionals here in the Bay Area, and it's always good to learn from our peers, from our colleagues, and we have a high amount of experience amongst our membership base. I think the average is 10 years. So especially for those of you who are looking for making those connections, that'll be good. You can also become a talent development leader and community builder. We have lots of volunteer roles. I am a volunteer. Paul Andrzejewski, who is also here, he is a volunteer. We volunteer to bring these programs to you. So if you liked this program, help us out. Come join and volunteer. We also have access to the job banks and past program materials and recordings. And you get special member fees or discounts if you are a member and you're joining one of these events. We also have special interest groups. This goes back to networking, leveraging your local network. We have special interest groups that focus on a variety of topics. And for an extra incentive today, if you go to our website and you join as a member and put in the code JOIN TODAY, you will get $20 off of your fee. This code is good for 7 days from today, so act quickly. We also have benefits if you are a member of the Association for Talent Development's national chapter. I am a member, and you join the chapter. If you are interested in learning more about the Association for Talent Development, that also includes world-class resources, a lot of recorded content, favorable fees. They have conferences and workshops that have been coming up. And if you are a member of our chapter and you purchase something from the national website, we can also benefit if you put in our code. And once again, you can use the code JOIN TODAY if you go on the TD website. And actually, let me put that in the chat so that you know exactly where I'm telling you to go. It's tdgoldengate.org. Same place where you registered for this event is where you can go and find out about being a member. Upcoming events. We have the TED Circle. So Paul, raise your hand. The TED Circles are free events where you get to talk and network about TED Talk related topics. That is on September 29th. We have holistic learning. That is one of our special interest groups on October 5th. We have 3D learning, which is another special interest group on October 11th. On October 14th, we have a course on leading unbreakable teams or building resilience within a team. Because if there were ever a time when your team or you yourself needed to build resilience, it is during the current time. So we have a speaker who's going to come talk to us about that. And very, very excited, we have an instructional design professional development workshop that is happening October 18th through the 22nd. So for those of you who want to refresh your instructional design skills or who are interested in building instructional design, Chris Schaefer, she is the instructor and she is amazing. She has been doing this year over year. We've always gotten great feedback on the course. And as I mentioned, I put tdgoldengate.org in the chat, but you can go there to see our event listings as well. I talked about this earlier, but if you are interested in events like this, please consider joining the chapter and becoming a volunteer. You can volunteer in a variety of ways. You don't have to facilitate trainings like I do. You can also help to manage our finances. You can help to manage memberships. You can help to spread the word. It's just a great way to give back. And if you have a topic that you want to share, you want to give your expertise, or you just want to grow your skills. Sorry, Kristen, I gotta call you out again. But if you want to develop your skills as a presenter, this is also a great way to do it.